Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 27th of May. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest weather, whether it's active weather or quiet weather. You can always check your latest forecast at weather.gov/Alaska, or find us in between the Alaska Weather Shows on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube. Call the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391. And those are just a few of the ways that you can stay in touch with us. Of course, there's always NOAA Weather Radio for your community as well. Here's a look at the hazardous weather outlook now as we're going ahead in time. We're still watching the red flag conditions across the Alaska Range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, mainly due to high winds. So we've got a stronger southerly flow working across a large part of Alaska. The other side of that is it's also pushing poor visibility and smoke pretty far north from the fire. The Funny River fire down here around Soldotna has been pushing smoke northward at times thanks to that southerly flow in Anchorage and the valley. However, many areas northward have also been experiencing smoke, and we're pretty sure that's where it is originating from, around Fairbanks, Eagle, even maybe around Fort Yukon, and probably farther north still. So many effects from the wildfire, even though it's not right next to the fire itself. Here's a look at that fire now from space. Once again, the NASA Earth Observatory took a picture of the Kenai Peninsula and added in a little bit of more information to it, labeling Anchorage for us here. This is the Cook Inlet, Knik Arm, and the Turnagain Arm in view, the Kenai Mountains, and Tustamina Lake. The red areas were active areas of burning, still within the 180,000 acre plus fire, and you can see the smoke now lofted northward. Some of that kind of being spread out a little bit more diffusely across Anchorage instead of this very tight plume that you see here. But this is a pretty big area, and no wonder that many areas further northward were experiencing some of that smoke, especially once those southerly winds kicked in. Now the good thing is the southerly winds have brought in a more wetter air, cooler temperatures, and rainfall. Not enough, but certainly some is better than none, and we are into the some category at this point. Looking at current fire danger across the Great Land, you'll see that northern parts of southeast now are into the high fire danger area. Doesn't look like any widespread moisture is coming your way in the next couple of days, so that will probably continue. A large part of the interior and the lower and middle Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys dealing with higher fire danger now. And we're back into the extreme fire danger region for parts of the Tanana Valley, north of the Alaska Range, into the Copper River Basin, and the Anchorage Bowl, and probably some parts of Matsu. A little bit of a reprieve for some southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, and right now Kodiak Island is out of that orange zone as well. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and out to the west we can see one area of low pressure that's still moving east and another one back behind it. A stronger trough in between means colder temperatures are crossing the Bering. Here's the low right now that has been pushing in those southerly winds into south central Alaska and the interior. We've got northerly flow coming in behind it. Here's our trough, and then another zone of low pressure behind it coming into areas west of the Kamchatka Peninsula. So it is probably a pattern that will repeat. It may take a little bit of a break in between, but we can see more moisture certainly heading in from the south and west, and it looks like we'll get some rain across southern parts of Alaska as we head into tonight. And then maybe a little bit of a break, becoming more showery at times, and then perhaps into the end of the week, another surge with a much stronger area of low pressure getting closer to south and southwest Alaska. For now, though, southeast dealing with pretty dry conditions, as we said. One wave of low pressures working through the Gulf. You can see another circulation out here to the west. Low clouds across the Bering, a little bit of a different pattern than what you're dealing with last week. And everything you see across the Yukon here, a lot of these kind of bubbly looking clouds are indeed thunderstorms. Quite a few showers and storms across northern parts of Canada tonight. And we were watching to see if any of that was going to drift westward into the Alcan. It doesn't look like that's going to happen today. However, areas around the Brooks Range, probably Eagle, maybe down to Northway, have an opportunity for an isolated shower or storm tomorrow. So things are starting to shape up into some of that summertime mode. A lot of moisture has been pushing northward here, and with the warmer weather, we've got enough instability, at least in a few places, especially on the upslope side of the Brooks Range, which is where we'll be watching for some of those storms tomorrow, and probably right there along the Alcan and into the Yukon Flats. Snow was falling across the Arctic coast earlier today. Places like Barrow, Atkasuk, out toward Point Hope and Point Lay were experiencing at least a little bit of snow. A trough of low pressure lied across the Brooks Range summits. Low pressure sitting west of the Seward Peninsula was adding rain to Gnomes Day. The YK Delta and the coastline looking at some light rain. Of course, rain was falling in south central. And areas west around Ambler and Bettles out toward Tanana looking at some light rain, and smoke reported anywhere from the central and eastern interior and south central, of course. The broad southwesterly flow will continue across Bristol Bay, and rain was falling across southern parts of the Bering, with a ridge of high pressure holding fast across the eastern Gulf, keeping most of southeastern Alaska, at least in a pleasant, more north and northwesterly flow. As we head through tonight, that should not change very much. Rain will start to move back into south central and southwestern Alaska. Another front will work through the central and eastern Aleutians. Areas of fog and rain should be expected there. And there's enough cold air across Norton Sound and parts of Seward Peninsula that you might see rain mixing with snow, a better chance of snow mainly north of the Bering Strait and also across some parts of the central Brooks Range there. And again, watch for some smoke on that southerly flow. As we head through Wednesday, isolated showers and thunderstorms are possible across the Brooks Range, mainly in the south-facing slopes and also across the Alcan border. We'll watch for smoke once again, and areas of rainfall are expected to continue for south central and parts of the Yukon and Kuskokwim river valleys and the YK Delta itself. Watching that cold air drop southward behind the storm means that as we head into Thursday, there is a possibility that parts of the YK could be dealing with a mix of rain and snow. Now, depending on exactly how that tracks, that could mean some snow or more rain than snow, but it does look like temperatures will be dropping fairly quickly. And once again, for you watching in southeast, high pressure is still your friend if you like the dry days, that is, and relatively clear and dry conditions are expected for you, with snow showers across the Arctic coast and a ridge trying to drop southward, bringing that colder air farther south toward the eastern chain, the Alaska Peninsula, and you'll notice out to the west, another surge of rain is gathering across the North Pacific and south of the western part of the chain. Temperatures today in southeast were in the upper 50s, so a little bit cooler out around Sitka, 53 degrees there, Juneau 54. Places like Wrangell and Petersburg toward Hyder were closer to the 60-degree mark, if not over it. Ketchikan and Annette also fairly mild. Mid to upper 40s around Prince William Sound. Cooler temperatures there thanks to more clouds and certainly some precipitation. Lower 50s along the Cook Inlet from Homer all the way to Anchorage. 50 in Talkeetna, 54 in Kodiak, and across the range you'll notice areas around Fairbanks stretched into the 60s. Eagle even made it to 72 by 4 o'clock, 67 in Northway, 65 in Fort Yukon, 45 in Anaktuvuk Pass, the Arctic coast in the 20s and 30s, with Kotzebue Sound looking at temperatures in the 30s to about 40 degrees there in Kotzebue itself. 42 in Nome. Grayling was showing 48, McGrath 53, Bethel closer to 50 degrees with Nunivak Island at 46. The Pribilofs were showing temperatures in the lower 40s this afternoon, anywhere from 50 in Dillingham to almost 60 in King Salmon, while most of the Alaska Peninsula was in the 40s and 50s. Sandpoint, one of the cooler spots, obviously at 46. Adak and Atka, pretty close to that, and 41 in Shemya. Overnight low temperatures will hover in the 30s and 40s for the southern half of the state. Southeast really not making it out of the 40s tonight. 46 in Kodiak, 48 around Anchorage, 46 in Talkeetna. About the same there in Fort Yukon, and north of the Brooks Range, temperatures get considerably colder, teens and 20s for most of the coast. Nome looking at 38, Fairbanks 44, Bethel 42, and most of the peninsula in the lower 40s, with Dutch Harbor, Unalaska looking at 43. High temperatures tomorrow in St. Paul, only 40 degrees, with Bethel closer to 50. Fairbanks moving upward towards 70 degrees, and Eagle and maybe Northway could go past that if the conditions are right. Mid-50s for south central, about 56 in Kodiak, with southeast looking at temperatures closer to 60 degrees tomorrow, so a warmer day for you, and 30 in Nome, with places like Kotzebue, Shishmaref, a little bit closer to the mid to even lower 40s. Flying weather will focus on a wide swath of IFR conditions across the Bering Sea coast and a large part of the Aleutian chain. Also across the Gulf Coast, mainly in the north and western corner and around Kodiak Island, expect IFR conditions there. And VFR for most of the Kenai Peninsula and the Matsu valleys there, with areas of smoke perhaps lofting farther northward, and we'll watch for thunderstorms to develop in the afternoon. Most of southeast should be in the clear. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass are some of those places where isolated thunderstorms could develop, so watch for that during the afternoon. VFR conditions are expected in both passes tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are expected to maintain VFR throughout the day. No major turbulence for your areas, it looks like right now. Rainy Pass expected to be MVFR. Same goes for Windy Pass. Isabel Pass will likely turn over to MVFR conditions as your Wednesday goes on. Mentasta Pass will expect VFR for right now. Tanita Pass will likely start there, but then head toward MVFR conditions through the day. And we see the possibility of smoke around Portage Pass, but IFR conditions are even more likely across the eastern side just due to the weather alone. Chilkoot and White Pass are expected to maintain VFR conditions there. Freezing levels show a wide area of warm air has lifted northward, but you can see the cold air is trying to make a comeback, dropping south of the Bering Sea. Freezing lines aloft are down to 2,000 feet as far south as the central chain, and the surface freezing line has dropped to St. Lawrence Island by tomorrow, still north of the Seward Peninsula, and you can see it's also farther north of the Brooks Range summits as you head up toward Kaktovik. So certainly some changes there and some colder weather trying to make its way southward. As that happens, icing potential is back upon us there with moisture back over a large part of the state. Southeast, once again, we don't see any major threat for you. Below 12,000 feet to about the freezing level for Kodiak Island, South Central, including parts of the Kenai Peninsula. Wouldn't be surprised to see occasional moderate, some reports there, and also across the Bering Coast and the southwestern deltas, anywhere below 10,000 feet to about the freezing level. Again, could present you with at least some occasional moderate. The jet stream shows two major troughs close to Alaska. One of those is working into the Pacific Northwest. We have a ridge out over the Gulf, and that's tracking in that moisture there from the south and west. And one reason we're going to stay in this pattern at least through just about the rest of the week. And then we've got the back side of the system, the trough dropping in that northerly flow in the upper atmosphere. That's allowing the cold to join into the west side of the Gulf as we head toward Thursday and into Friday. At 9,000 feet for tomorrow, a south and westerly flow will continue that moisture pump right into the heart of Alaska. Southwesterly winds are pretty light across southeast. We've got our ridge protecting most of southeastern Alaska with winds there as high as 30 knots, but most areas won't see that. A northwesterly flow on the western side of the Bering, only 20 to about 30 knots. And winds are pretty light going through the Bering Strait as they round the northern side of that low pressure system, only 10 to 25 knots. At 3,000 feet, our ridge is present once again from the Alcan border southward into the Gulf, and wind speeds at this level also fairly light for southeast. A southwesterly flow moving over Bristol Bay shows winds anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots tops, and winds really slow down across the Arctic coast. For the interior, only around 15 knots coming over Fairbanks and the Kenai Peninsula. Look for those winds as much as 15 to 20 knots. Same for Kodiak Island, though a little bit stronger as you head out to sea. For the central and western chain, those winds may be as high as 20 to 25 knots, but generally from the south or from the north and northwest. Turbulence potential then, we do see an opportunity for at least some light chop there north of the Brooks Range summits over Kotzebue Sound, St. Lawrence Island, and through the Bering Strait, over the Pribilovs, and then generally north of the central chain. Again, that may be as high as 6,000 feet to as low as below 3,000 feet. And across southwest for mostly areas over land below 5,000 feet, and probably along Turnagain Arm and around south central, especially the northern parts. We're looking at least a little bit of light to isolated moderate thanks to some of the winds being squeezed through Turnagain Arm. So watch for some chop there if you're going back and forth from the Kenai Peninsula to the Anchorage Bowl or even Matsu. And then around the Kodiak Island region and toward Chignik, below 6,000 feet, probably an opportunity for some light to isolated moderate chop as we go through the daytime tomorrow. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
It's civilization versus nature's fury. Raging blizzards bury cities under thousands of tons of snow. Howling hurricanes tear apart coastal communities with wind and rain. And flash floods wipe entire towns off the face of the earth. As the skies clear, people begin to pick up the pieces. But after the storm, insidious damage is still being done. Our most vital natural resource is under assault, our nation's waters.
We're at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, and we're trying to find out what a watershed is. First victim. I need you to tell me what a watershed is. Do you have any idea?
Watershed?
A watershed? Where people go to the bathroom?
Sweating, I guess.
Something to do with sweating?
Uh-huh.
Like after you run, when you...
You perspire, yeah.
And then you shed it?
Uh-huh.
We wanted to ask you if you knew what a watershed was.
A watershed?
Yeah.
Is it kind of like the rain?
Do you know what a watershed is?
A shed that holds water.
Come here for a second. I want to ask you something. Do you know what a watershed is?
No. No.
Do you have any idea? What do you think it has something to do with?
I don't know.
What a watershed is?
Yeah.
That's just a drain pool, I guess you'd say, or the drain area. That's where the rainwater drains into the river.
Correct. That's a great answer.
A watershed is that area of land that drains to a body of water, be that if it's a river, a stream, the ocean, an estuary, a bay. Wherever you live drains to some water body, and you live in a watershed, so everyone lives in a watershed.
And in this modern industrial age, our water sources are becoming more contaminated with each passing year.
The biggest water quality problem that we have in the nation today is polluted runoff.
All water east of the Continental Divide drains to the Atlantic, while water west of the divide flows to the Pacific. And one drop of rain can cross many different watersheds along the way. As runoff flows into rivers, streams, and storm drains, the water picks up trash, dirt, bacteria, toxic chemicals, and fertilizers, creating a soup of pollutants that is extremely hazardous to the environment. And the consequences of polluted runoff exist worldwide.
The UN estimate is that there's about 1 billion people on the planet right now who don't have adequate access to fresh water.
97% of all water on Earth is salty ocean water. Of the remaining 3% that's fresh, over 2/3 is frozen in glaciers and polar ice. That leaves less than 1% of all the planet's water for our use.
I predict in the future that some of the U.S. water needs are going to come through pipeline because we have just overused our supply.
To address the complex threats facing U.S. water resources, the Environmental Protection Agency recommends adopting a watershed approach.
We're trying to reconnect some of the river.
It's a method that looks at each watershed for its own unique set of environmental challenges and solutions.
In many cases, people mistakenly identify large discharge pipes in the water as the problem. But that may not be the problem. It may be coming from agricultural runoff. It may be coming from stormwater runoff over parking lots and impervious surfaces. Every watershed is different, and you need to look at each watershed in its own terms and then think systematically about how you remediate, how you clean up that watershed.
In California, the Santa Monica Bay watershed drains a dangerous amount of polluted runoff after each storm.
When it rains, literally the whole residue of urban living ends up getting washed into the storm drain system and ends up going straight into the bay on Santa Monica Bay's beaches with no treatment whatsoever.
It's actually like a giant toilet flushing because all of the pollution, the dog mess has been building up and building up and building up. When it rains, it just flushes into the storm drain and goes directly into the surf.
In 1996, the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission proved there was a link between the contaminated runoff in the Santa Monica Bay and reports of illness afflicting people who swim there.
What we did find was at the outlets of storm drains, no matter where they were up and down the bay, if there was a flow of runoff into the surf zone, those people that were swimming in those areas definitely experienced higher incidences of illnesses.
The pollutants in the water affect surfers because we're actually the indicator species with all the pollutants. When we are in the waters, we're ingesting it through our skin and our mouth. Even if people don't take a swallow of water, it's still getting into our systems, our ears, any orifice on your body. And it causes infections, it can cause colds, sore throats at the very least.
I wouldn't want to swim in, water that's got those diseases in there, just floating around, making more diseases.
I've seen it pretty much as bad as it can be. I've seen crap floating out in the water, literally.
Generically, we call it fecal coliform. More specifically, you might know of it as E. coli, salmonella, or enterococcus. Whatever's in poop.
There's times when it tastes funky, for sure.
Every day, the city and county of Los Angeles perform a battery of tests to keep the public informed about water quality in the Santa Monica Bay. Cesar Arzadan begins the monitoring process each morning by taking a series of coastline water samples. Then it's back to the lab for analysis.
Most of the bacteria that you're going to see, it comes from feces. And when you put it under the UV light, you're going to see a different kind of color. It's a fluorescent sign that there is a bacteria, and that one is called E. coli. That one definitely is feces from animals, or it could be humans also.
The results are reported to the health department, and beach warnings are posted as necessary.
The number of beach postings has decreased, and 85% of the beaches that have been monitored in California have received either A or B grades, and that's significantly different than 4 years ago.
But while progress is being made in California, the harmful effects of polluted runoff are a growing concern everywhere. So what can the average person do to help reduce pollution in our watersheds?
How you apply pesticides or not in your garden, how you wash your cars, making sure that you don't throw cigarette butts out onto the street.
Do not dump things on the ground, especially oils or any chemical pollutants. Pick up after your dogs. A lot of people don't realize how important that is. And just be a conscientious citizen and don't leave anything on the ground.
I think one person can make a difference and needs to make the difference. If not you, who?
Coming up.
We're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
Can the Gulf of Mexico be saved from polluted runoff?
Time now for a look at your marine weather forecast. We'll start with yesterday's ice edge. We'll have another update as we head into tomorrow. Look at the number of areas that are opening up there, not only in the Chukchi Sea, but also south of the Bering Strait and along the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Once again, a quick reminder that any shore-fast ice, probably on this picture from Point Lay to Point Hope to Kivalina, Kotzebue, and around to Shishmaref, and certainly on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, is likely unstable, as well as areas along the St. Lawrence coast. So once again, that shore-fast ice, probably dangerous and too dangerous to be out on at this point. Here's a look at southeast Alaska now. Winds will come in from the south if you're in the Lund Canal, running around 15 knots there with 3-foot seas. Northwesterlies blowing anywhere from Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound southward toward 20 to 25 knots. 4 to 5 foot seas are expected there. Otherwise, an onshore flow south of Gustavus to the Dixon entrance running around 10 to 20 knots with about 5 foot seas there. Winds are a little more variable around Yakutat, but they'll become southeasterly as we head into Thursday. The onshore flow continues south of Gustavus to the Dixon entrance, and very little change in the inner waterways there. More of a southerly flow in the north and northwesterlies the further south you go. 15 to about 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas on the inside. Across south central, we'll look for more of a southeasterly flow inside of Prince William Sound, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Variable winds in the north and westerly Gulf, and then more of a southeasterly flow crossing the Barren Islands at 20 to 25 knots. Southeasterly winds up to 15 knots can be expected between Homer and Kenai, and a variable flow in the northern part of the Cook Inlet. Southerlies across Kodiak Island, 3-foot seas in Chillicothe Strait, and 8-foot seas on the east side. Those winds will increase a little bit to more of a 20-knot flow on Thursday. Southeasterlies coming into the western parts of the Gulf, and easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound up to 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, so a little bit of chop there. And southeasterly winds outside of Prince William Sound up to 25 knots with a northeasterly flow setting up in the Cook Inlet, coming down the inlet 15 to 20 knots and becoming more easterly west of the Barren Islands with a 4-foot sea and winds up to 25 knots. A south flow will come across the Alaska Peninsula and then turn a little bit inside of Bristol Bay tomorrow. More of a southeasterly flow there at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. 5-foot seas north of Cold Bay, 15 knots on the southern side of the Bering. Coming in from the south, also looking at 15 to 20 knots there south of the Alaska Peninsula with 8 to 9-foot seas in the Pacific. Becoming westerly south of Sand Point and King Cove as we head into Thursday. 7-foot seas there, and on the Bering side, 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. Winds become a little more light across Bristol Bay, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Stronger winds, though, still coming into places like Castle Cape and Chignik, 20 knots with a 7-foot sea for Thursday. Across the Aleutians, you'll notice a more predominant northwesterly flow across the central and western part of the chain, 20 to 25 knots, with 6 to 8 foot seas in the west, 7 to 9 foot seas across the central islands, and more of a west, becoming southwesterly flow at about 15 knots for Nikolsky and Unalaska, 4 to 5 foot seas in the Bering, and 6 to 7 foot seas in the Pacific. And that shift also migrates eastward with time on Thursday. So you're looking at more of a westerly flow for the central and parts of the east central chain. Northwesterly flow south of Unalaska, Nikolsky at 25 knots with a 7 to 9 foot sea, and west and southwesterly winds there as the ridge begins to overtake the western part of the chain, 5 to 6 foot seas coming in on Thursday. Across the west coast, variable winds anywhere from Hooper Bay and Macoriac westward toward the St. Matthew Island waters. Southerly winds there for the Pribilofs and Kuskokwim Bay, both at 15 knots, and 15 knots with a 4-foot sea around St. Lawrence Island on Wednesday, becoming northeasterly behind that low pressure system. Remember, that's dropping southward, so colder air comes with that. A westerly flow across the Pribilofs with an 8-foot sea. Southerlies coming into Kuskokwim Bay with a 4-foot sea, and southwesterlies into places like Hooper Bay with a 4-foot sea for you. Across the Arctic coast, a broad easterly flow becomes northeasterly once it moves out of the Beaufort and into the Chukchi Sea coast, 10 to about 20 knots across the Beaufort. And then once you get into the Chukchi, that's about 20 to 25 knots along the coast, still with plenty of ice. Thursday, an easterly flow across the Beaufort Sea coast, 20 knots there, a northeasterly flow from Wainwright down toward Cape Lisburn and Point Hope, and northeasterlies inside of Kotzebue Sound. That's running around 15 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, red flag warnings continue to at least 10 o'clock tonight for the Alaska Range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. And don't be surprised with those stronger southerly winds that are creating the opportunity for those red flag conditions to see smoke on that as well. The smoke will be noticed probably in places like Fairbanks and Eagle and maybe Fort Yukon and anywhere that's directly north of what we're seeing down here in the south across the Kenai Peninsula. But rain is also headed your way. It looks like there's a chance for at least a few showers, maybe a thunderstorm across the Brooks Range and the Alcan border tomorrow. So watch for some of those clouds to fire up in the daytime heat. Moisture moving northward, and we'll continue to see that pattern tomorrow across south central. A chance for rain starting later tonight and then picking up during the early morning hours before that winds down a little bit. Out to the west, low pressure moving onto the west coast brings some colder air with it and maybe an opportunity for rain and snow to mix there. Meanwhile, southeast is in the clear with some drier days continuing toward the end of the week. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.